We continue now at the top of Daf Beis Amid Beis in Meseches Menachos. This is Menachos Daf Tube. On the previous Amid, the Gemara said that if a person performs part of the avod of a karban mincha shelo lishma, that doesn't mean that the subsequent avodas can be done shelo lishma. That's what the Mishnah indicates when it says that the karban mincha is kosher, ella, but it just does not fulfill the obligation of the owner. The idea is that in every other way, it is a kosher karban mincha, and so again, you can't have further deviations. And the Gemara said in the previous Amid that the source might be from the pasuk, because the pasuk talks about a neder, and then it refers to it as an adava, and the idea is that if it's not going to fulfill the obligation of the owner as a neder because there was a deviation in terms of it being offered shelo lishma, but it still is considered an adava, and as the Gemara now concludes, an adava mishari l'shanuye ba, is it permitted to deviate by an adava? Of course not, and so therefore again that shows there's no subsequent deviations. Rashi explains when adava mishari l'shanuye ba v'haksivim zevach shlomim karbano. It says in the pasuk zevach shlomim karbano, which means shetei zevicha l'shem shlomim. The slaughtering needs to be for the sake of a karban shlomim. It has to be lishma. And the Gemara continues, Lema masnisin delok Rabbi Shimon. Let us say that our Mishnah is not like Rabbi Shimon, the Tanya, because we learned in a brisa, Rabbi Shimon Omer, Rabbi Shimon says, Kol ha-menachos shenikmitzu shelo lishman, all karban minchas where the fistful is taken shelo lishman ksheros, they are kosher, the olu lebailim l'shem chova, and they do satisfy the obligation of the owner. Shein ha-menachos domos lezvachim, because karban mincha is not similar to zvachim. A karban mincha flour offering is not similar to slaughtered offerings, to animal karbanos. Shehakometz machav. For example, if somebody takes a fistful of a machavas, a minchas machavas is in a pan, and he does it l'shum marcheshes for the sake of a minchas marcheshes, which is a deep pan, but the procedure that he's going through, it's clear that it's really machavas. And charevo, let's say it's a dry karban mincha, doesn't have oil, l'shum belula, but he does it for the sake of one with oil. Again, the procedure proves that l'shum charevo, that it is a dry karban mincha, and so therefore it will satisfy the obligation of the owner. Avol bezvachim ein okain, but by slaughtered karbanos, that's not true. Shchita achas lekulan, they all have the same slaughtering. Uzrika achas lekulan, they all have the same throwing of the blood. V'kabol achas lekulan, they all have the same receiving of the blood. And so therefore the two cases are different. And again, that's why Rabbi Shimon says that it's going to satisfy the obligation of the owner by karban mincha. And the Gemara continues and says, Hanichol Ravashi. Now it's good according to Ravashi. The Yomar, because he says, Kan bekometz machavas l'shum marcheshes. Here we're talking where the kometz is taken as it's a machavas, but he does it l'shum marcheshes. You don't have the word mincha over there. And kan bekometz minchas machavas l'shum minchas marcheshes. In the other case is where he takes the kometz minchas machavas as a minchas marcheshes. So then you can simply say, masnisin, that in our Mishnah where it does not satisfy the obligation of the owner, that's mincha l'shum minchi. That's where the word mincha is included in there. That's why we're going to say that in that case it's not going to satisfy the obligation of the owner. And so essentially the contradiction can be resolved. We can say that Rabbi Shimon is the Tana of our Mishnah, and that all works according to Ravashi, and we'll see Rashi in a moment. Elo l'Rabba v'Rava, but according to Rabba and Rava who have a different approach, my equal amemra, what are we going to say according to Rabba and Rava? And Rashi explains, Rabbi Shimon Omer kol ha-menachos. Rabbi Shimon says all karban mincha, v'afilo minchas chote. Now Rabbi Shimon over here is saying this by all karban minchas, even minchas chote. Again, in our Mishnah, by minchas chote, the Mishnah was stricter by minchas chote and said that it is disqualified. Rabbi Shimon here is saying that it's ksheros and it's alul abaylim l'shum chova. She'ein ha-menachos domos l'zvachim, because menachos are not similar to zvachim. The v'zvachim modina delo alu. The point is Rabbi Shimon agrees that by slaughtered karbanos that they will not satisfy the obligation of the owner. But over here by karban mincha, what is done with the karban proves shehu mechazev, that whatever thought he's speaking out loud is a lie. The marcheshes amuka, because when it comes to marcheshes, that's a deep pan. Umaseh roch shemrachen, and it's softer. And machavas safa, when it comes to machavas, again that's like a flat pan. Umaseh koshen, it's harder. But parakol hamenachos bos matzos, that's coming up later in parakol hamenachos bos matzah. Avol bezvachim enokein, by zvachim it's not true. Ein lehem ma'isa mochich. You don't have a ma'isa part of the procedure that's clear. Hilgach, therefore, mahani behushino delo alu l'shem chova. Therefore, if there is a deviation, it will not satisfy the obligation of the owner. And Rashi continues, minchas chareva, dry karban mincha, that's the minchas chote, that's the mincha of the chote, minchas kenos, and minchas kenos, which again is the mincha of the sota. T'chsibahu lo yasim ala Hashem, and there it says that there cannot be oil. And Rashi continues, Belula, that's mixed with oil, Shar Menachos, that's other carbon minchas, V'hashta Pliga Masnisin Aled Rabbi Shimon Betarti. So now it comes out that our Mishnah disagrees with Rabbi Shimon on 2 points. Chada de Masnisin Katani B'chol HaMenachos Delo Alu. Number 1, our Mishnah says that all Menachos, they never satisfy the obligation of the owner if it's Shelo Lishma. V'chada, and also, the Kapasal Tana Didan Minchas Chote Lagamri, when it comes to the Tana of our Mishnah, a Minchas Chote is totally disqualified. And again, according to Rabbi Shimon, in the Bryce over here, all menachos, including the minchas chote, is going to be kosher if it's shelo l'shman, and it's going to be olo l'baylim l'shem chova. And then the Gemara said, Hanichol Ravashi, it's good according to Ravashi, the metaris l'kamon ki ramina de Rabbi Shimon do amar beduchta achrisi. We're going to have another contradiction at the Rabbi Shimon dohacha. We're going to have another contradiction within Rabbi Shimon coming up in the Gemara, and so we have answers for the Amoraim to that contradiction. Umetaris lu Ravashi, and Ravashi is going to answer, Deha do amar Rabbi Shimon olu, when Rabbi Shimon says it satisfies the obligation of the owner, that's Biomer Hareini Kometz Machavas L'Shem Marcheshes. That's if the way he phrases it is he says, I'm taking the kometz of this Machavas for Marcheshes. He doesn't say the word Mincha. Dekevin de Lo Idchar Shma de Mincha, since he doesn't mention the word Mincha, Ella Shma de Mana, he just mentions the vessel. So Divrei Ruach Bi'almaninu, these are just words that don't mean anything, and that's why it satisfies the obligation of the owner. V'hadakam Rabbi Shimon Bi'alma de Lo Alo, when Rabbi Shimon says it doesn't satisfy the obligation of the owner, Kagon de Idkar Shma de Mincha, that's where he mentions the word mincha, so ikalukma masnisim Rabbi Shimon, the masnisim did kar shma de mincha. Then you could simply say that our Mishnah is like Rabbi Shimon, and the case of the Mishnah is where he mentioned mincha. Kidim mefarash shelo l'shmo v'l'shmo l'shem minchas nedava l'shem minchas chote. Again, shelo l'shmo v'l'shmo, like it says l'shem minchas nedava l'shem minchas chote. He says the word mincha. Ela l'Rabba l'Rava, but according to Rab and Rava, the mishanu l'vataymi achrini, they have other answers to the contradiction with Rabbi Shimon. Kidim mefarash l'kamon, as will be explained as we go on. So what are you going to say according to Rabba and Rava? And the Gemara continues and says, V'chitema, now if you're going to say Kidukam Mishani Rabba, that like Rabba answered again with the contradiction within Rabbi Shimon, Kan b'shinoi kodesh, Kan b'shinoi bailim, he answered that here we're talking about shinoi kodesh, here we're talking about shinoi bailim. We'll see Rashi in a moment. Hamas nisin shinoi kodeshu, but our Mishnah is shinoi kodesh, the katani, because it says Keitzad l'shmon v'shalo l'shmon. What's considered l'shmon and shalo l'shmon? L'shom minchas chote, l'shom minchas nedava. It means for the sake of a minchas chote or the sake of a minchas nedava. So that answer will not work. V'inami k'dekamashani Rav, and if you're going to say like Rava answered the contradiction within Rabbi Shimon, kan b'kometz mincha l'shom mincha, kan b'kometz mincha l'shom zevach. Here we're talking where the kometz was taken from the mincha to be for the sake of a mincha, but in the other case it's for the sake of an animal carbon. Hamas nisin mincha l'shom minchi. But our Mishnah is also, it's talking about mincha l'shom mincha. T'katani shalo l'shmon v'l'shmon l'shem minchas nedava l'shem minchas chote. It says explicitly that he's doing it for the sake of minchas nedava, for the sake of minchas chote. And so Ella, rather you have to say l'Rabba v'Rava, according to Rabba and Rava's approach within Rabbi Shimon, machvarta masnisin delok Rabbi Shimon, that our Mishnah is actually not like Rabbi Shimon. And Rashi explains, V'chitayim, if you're going to say Masnisim Mesukma Rabbi Shimon, maybe you'll try to say our Mishnah could be like Rabbi Shimon. Kidimishani Rabba L'kamon L'taimid Rabbi Shimon will use the answer the Rabba gives later in terms of Rabbi Shimon. Kan b'shinoi kodesh v'kan b'shinoi bailim. He makes a distinction between shinoi kodesh and shinoi bailim, meaning Hadi Yomar Rabbi Shimon, that which Rabbi Shimon says, Alu, that it does satisfy the obligation of the owner. That's b'shinoi kodesh. That's talking about shinoi kodesh. Kagon minchas machavas l'shem minchas marcheshes. For example, where he says this minchas machavas, he says it's for the sake of a minchas marcheshes. There, it's going to satisfy the obligation to maaseh mochichin shu mechaziv, because it's clear that he's lying. V'hadamar lo ala, when it says it does not satisfy the obligation of the owner, b'shinoi bailim, that's talking where there was a deviation in terms of who the owner is. Kagon sheivia ruvein v'kamsa kohen l'shem Shimon. Ruvein brings it. The kohen is taken by the kohen for the sake of Shimon. The leka ma'isa mochiach, there you don't have an action that proves the other way. Either Ruvein, either Shimon, whether it's Ruvein or Shimon's, but that you can't use that to answer that question, because v'hamasnisim b'shinoi kodesh ma'iri, our Mishnah is clearly talking about shinoi kodesh. It's not talking about shinoi bailim. The katani delo alu, and yet it says that it doesn't satisfy the obligation. The katani keitza l'shman v'shalo l'shman kagon shakamatz minchas chote l'shem minchas chote l'shem nedava. So clearly again, it's talking about shinoi kodesh. So that answer will not work for our Mishnah. V'inami k'demeshani Rav, and let's say you're going to try Rava's answer. L'tayim of Rabbi Shimon, again Rava's answer within Rabbi Shimon. His answer was that when we say it does satisfy the obligation of the owner, that's where it's a minchas machavas. He does it for the sake of a minchas marcheshes. Mishum dechsiv zos toras hamincha. He learns from the pasuk. It says zos toras hamincha, Torah achas l'chol menachos, one law for all menachos. V'hada katani lo alu. And when it says that it doesn't satisfy the obligation of the owner, that's bekometz mincha l'shem zevach. That's talking about when he does it for the sake of mincha, for the sake of a slaughtered carbon. Well, the kamon parach bekometz l'shem zevach l'skasher nami. Now the Gemara later will ask, even if he does it for the sake of an animal carbon, it still should be kosher. Don't we say that the actions that you take should prove that what you said was incorrect, you were lying? That will be answered later on. The question that we're asking over here, we can also ask from Lishman and Shalol Lishman, Kedekshina L'Rabba, the same way we asked on Rabba. Just the way the Gemara is going, it's just going according to the order of the Mishnah. But the point is, again, you're not able to use Rava's answer either, because our Mishnah is talking about mincha for mincha. It's not talking about mincha for zevach. And again, mincha for mincha, according to Rava's approach, should satisfy the obligation of the owner. In our Mishnah, it says the obligation of the owner is not satisfied. And the Gemara continues, V'rami de Rabbi Shimon ad Rabbi Shimon, and we have a contradiction within Rabbi Shimon, as Rashi already mentioned. The Tanya, because we learned in another brayso, Rabbi Shimon Omer, Rabbi Shimon says, Kodesh Kadashim hika chatos v'cha It talks about the mincha as Kodesh Kadashim, like chatos and like asham. And we learn from there, Yeshman kechatos, sometimes it's like chatos. By chatos, we're strict by Shalol Lishma. V'yeshman kasham, and sometimes it's like an asham where we're not strict. Minchas chote, and what do we mean? By minchas chote, harei kechatos, there we're strict like a chatos. Lafikach kamsa Shalol Lishma psula. Therefore, if the kometz is Shalol Lishma, it's disqualified. Kechatos, just like a chatos. Minchas nedava harei kasham, by minchas nedava, that's like an asham. Lafikach kamsa Shalol Lishma ksheira. Therefore, if the kometz is taken Shalol Lishma, it's kosher. Ucha asham, like a carbon asham. Ma asham kosher ve'eno meratza, and just like by an asham, it is kosher, but does not satisfy the obligation of the owner. Af minchas nedava ksheira ve'eno meratza. So too minchas nedava is kosher, and it does not satisfy the obligation of the owner. And clearly, again, this brisa of Rabbi Shimon is different than Rabbi Shimon above, who said all of the carbon minchas are kosher. And the Gemara says, again, these are the answers Rashi mentioned. Amar Rabba says, lo kash, it's not difficult. Kan b'shinoi kodesh, kan b'shinoi bailim. It depends if we're talking about shinoi kodesh or shinoi bailim. Again, when we're talking about shinoi kodesh, that means minchas machavas for the sake of a minchas marcheshes, since maaseh mochichin, since it's clear that what he is saying is not really true, so it actually is kosher in that situation. It satisfies the obligation of the owner. When we say it doesn't satisfy, that's talking about shinoi bailim. That's Rabba's approach. Amar le Abaye said to him, he said to Rabba, Michti, let us see, Machshava de Pasal Rachmana, the fact that the wrong intention is a disqualification, Hekeshehi, that's learned from a Hekesh, it's learned from a comparison. So Mali Shinoi Kodesh, Mali Shinoi Bailim, what difference does it make if it's Shinoi Kodesh or Shinoi Bailim? Why should it make a difference? Amar le, he said to him, Maseh Mochichin Dekam Rabbi Shimon Svarahi. The idea that we follow the fact that the actions show that what he said is not true, that's logical. The Rabbi Shimon Darish, time at the kruk, because Rabbi Shimon in general, he darshans the reasoning behind the pasuk. And so therefore we say as follows, Machshav de lo minkara, if it's a machshava where it's not clear, again, it's not clear, you don't have a situation where the procedure is showing, identifying this carbon, so then pasal rachmana, then the Torah says it's disqualified, but machshava de minkara, but if there's a machshava, a wrong machshava, but it's clear otherwise based on the procedure of this carbon, so lo pasal rachmana, there, the Torah does not disqualify. But the Gemara continues and asks, according to that, Elameata, but according to that, Ola Sa'of, let's say you have a carbon Ola, a bird carbon Ola, Shemolka Lamala, where the Malika is done in the upper half of the Mizbeach, Misham Chatas, and it's done for the sake of a carbon Chatas, Misham Chatas Sa'of, again, is the sake of a carbon Chatas, a bird Chatas, so Tirza, so then it should be accepted because Maaseh Mochichan Ola, because what he does, the procedure shows to Ola Sa'ofi that it is in fact an Ola Sa'of. Di Chata Sa'ofi, because if it's a Chata Sa'of, Lamata Hava of it would be done on the lower half of the Mizbeach. But the Gemara says that's not necessarily true. Atu Chata Sa'of Lamala Milesa, is there no such thing as a Chata Sa'of on the upper half of the Mizbeach? Ha'amar Mar, but the master said, Malika, B'chol Makom B'Mizbeach Kasheira, Malika done in any part of the Mizbeach is going to be kosher. The Gemara continues, Ola Sa'of Shemitza Dama Lamala L'Shem Chata Sa'of. Let's say you have an Ola Sa'of, and you squeeze the blood on the upper half as if it's a chatas of, tirza, that should be accepted. Because maaseh mochichin oled olas of, because there, again, the procedure shows it's an olas of. The chatas of, because if it was a chatas of, lamata hava avid lo hazah, he would be doing the sprinkling on the lower half of the mizbeach, and we will continue with this discussion in the next video on Daf Gimel Amud Aleph.